I'd like to welcome everyone to the Pacific Institute's Kitchen Table. The intent of the Kitchen Table is to provide a platform where we are able to share and discuss the dynamic world of cognitive science and the specific role it plays in performance. I'd like to introduce our co-hosts, Greg Coughlin and Ron Medved from the Pacific Institute. They have over 4 decades of experience working with hundreds of organizations on applying cognitive psychology and science. Pull up a chair. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Pacific Institute's Kitchen Table. I'm here with Ron Medved, and we're still in the process of sort of telling the story of the Pacific Institute. And we left off with the 70s and 80s and 90s and just beginning into 2000s. Ron, let me throw the ball to you. Is that you had left the Institute for 7 years and came back in the beginning of 2000, the year 2002 or 2003. What was going on at the Institute? You would have, it probably would have been really cool to be able to kind of step out and step back in and see what had changed and what was significant. Give us a little bit of your insight, your recollection, your history.
Yeah, that's exactly sort of what I hoped we could talk about a little bit. When I came back to the Pacific Institute, it was, one of the reasons why is because it's not easy being a freelance consultant, sort of living by your wits and, without a safety net for 7 years. And that's pretty much what I did. And so I kind of ran my course on that. I also missed the Pacific Institute. I missed the Pacific Institute's community. I like to be in a community. I like to be on a team. And so Lou and I, had some conversations. Interestingly, John McNeil had a vice president position, and John was wanting to move on and do something else. And so I came in and I took over for John, which was basically managing the project directors in North America. I was a business development vice president for North America. And at that time, there was about 100 project directors all across Canada and North America, and starting to happen down in Mexico as well. As I look back on it, I came in at a very fortuitous time for me because there was a lot of momentum at the Institute. The Institute had a lot of cool things that were going. The international conferences were still happening. And when I first came back, there was a big international conference that I remember attending. Lou was getting ready to make a new curriculum, which was a later version of Investment in Excellence. And actually, it was one of the, arguably, it was sort of maybe the most excellent sort of job of teaching, creating a video curriculum that Lou ever made. And he did that in 2005. At the same time, John McNeil, one of the things that he had done is that he'd gone and sort of with Lou started working on a Better LA, which included Coach Pete Carroll, who was at that time down at the University of Southern California. But a Better LA project was this marvelous endeavor. We're using Pete Carroll's credibility, Lou's credibility, the clients that we had in the Southern California area, basically to put a project together to reduce gang violence in the Los Angeles area. And so we came up with a program that, where we actually gave our education away to the inner city, gave it away to the institutions that served the inner city. And it was a marvelous project and very successful. And actually, even charity sometimes leads you to, good things like even more business. So we ended up doing more business with the public sector down there as a consequence of sort of this charitable project, that we were involved in. And anyway, it's a marvelous story. And we even, got to the point where we were training gang members, from gangs in Los Angeles to actually facilitate our education. So that I was not involved in that so much, but that was a big project that was going on sort of in parallel, with what I was doing. I think that supporting a cadre of 100 project directors is some days it's like herding cats, and in other days, my job was to do the best to maintain and sometimes create a positive culture for them, to work in. So that could be as simple as just making sure that they felt that the organization was responsive to them, that if they called, someone was going to return their call. I did quite a bit of traveling, to visit project directors, see them on their own turf. I remember coming up to Saskatchewan, as a matter of fact, as sort of part of those duties. And anyway, you and I developed that's when our relationship really started in earnest, because we would talk regularly on the phone, and, you'd use me as the sounding board, and I was interested in what you were doing creatively, with your projects. And so I had lots of relationships kind of like that, none better than yours and mine, Greg, I don't think, but that I found ways to sort of be in collaboration with as many project directors as I could.
I feel mutual about that, Ron, just in terms of our relationship. If I come back to, a couple points that you made, that, the role and significant leadership of the Pacific Institute, Lou and John McNeil profiled in the Better LA project. For me, as a partner with the Institute, it was those type of projects that really made me fall deeper in love with what we were doing. And I was so proud of the work that was done. And it, was led by work we did in Northern Ireland, or work that we did in South Africa, or work that we did in Guatemala. And then for me, I was really interested and aware that was going on with the Better LA. So it was the first project that I was sort of running along the side, kind of watching and observing. And it was part of the value proposition that the Pacific Institute for me was so attractive. Was not only are we, trying to make a difference in the world, but we really put priority on making a difference. And so, that's why I'm so glad you mentioned John McNeil, because John's, if I think of John McNeil, I think of heart, and just sort of his spirit has always been to make a difference in places that were underserved. The other thing for me in the 2000s, and the 2004 global conference, was I had the, sort of the comfort zone stretch of being the co-MC with Laurel Monague. And one of my clients was being profiled because they had significant performance outcomes that they got. And that conference was an interesting conference because it resulted in a book called The Culture of Excellence. And what it was sort of what we started in 1995 with the work on culture. 10 years later, we were bringing the evidence to show that, in fact, if you focused on culture and used applied psychology to make the shift of your culture, there was performance outcomes. And so it was me, the time didn't go that fast because I was, working to be gainfully employed. But it was such a validation that, 10 years later, we were now seeing the return on investment that our clients were making on culture.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing was our client group was changing again to the Caterpillars and the Toyotas and, sort of the Fortune 500 companies, or extended further. At the same time, the educational portfolio led by Joe Pace, Dr. Pace, was also getting established. And, you were better, you had better sight line on that than I did. And so can you talk a little bit about that work, because it was substantive?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking as you were talking. I said, this is where I want to go next. Joe Pace, Joe Pace had a doctorate, and his, I think it's a related field in terms of efficacy, but Joe's business experience before he came with the Pacific Institute is that he was a president of a private career school. And Joe came on board with us. I mean, going back to maybe the late 80s, actually early 90s. It's interesting. There's a story about John McNeil and Joe Pace and how John sort of helped Joe get started. But Joe, in addition to having a doctorate, in psychology, was a heck of a businessman. Still is a heck of a businessman. He's still with us. He tried to retire a few years ago, and he's back. Because he has more fun. He has more fun working. But Joe, he came up, the businessman in him, he came up with a package to sell our education to career schools and have the career schools pass the education on to their students. And he developed a whole market and really saturated that market, I think, in the 2000s, for example. I mean, Joe's contribution, his productivity, to the Institute was significant in terms of our overall revenues. And so, yeah, Joe put together also too a collection of career school college presidents, that were their own fraternity, their own study group, if you will. And anyway, Joe is a really good teacher as well, but he was also a really good marketer of our education, and he designed this system. I don't know, hundreds of colleges are involved in that network of career schools, and to this day, they're still connected with the Institute.
Along the trail of expanding into different sectors and deepening not just in communities but career colleges and schools, we'd spend quite a bit of time, and you specifically spent a fair amount of time working on sports projects. And so tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap up this session with finishing off with the sports part. But from the very beginning, Lou was interested in athletes and sports and football, and quite often, I mean, it's amazing the ratio of NFL players to other companies. I think the Pacific Institute had the lion's share of retired NFL players. But tell us sort of the sports view of the relationship to the Pacific Institute.
Yeah. Well, with Lou being a coach, and we've always had a number of athletes, that work with the Institute. It was only natural, to have sports projects. Interestingly, even though we've had a lot of high profile sports projects, like working with Pete Carroll, like at the University of Southern California, Fred Akers at the University of Texas, I've worked with Nick Saban at the University of Alabama. We've had a team that's worked with them during some of their championship years. We work with the USA Olympic swim team, and Mark Schubert was the coach there as a graduate. And anyway, different organizations, over the years, we worked with the Phoenix Suns basketball in the NBA way back, in the early 70s. And interesting, even today here, 50 years later, we have a relationship with the the Phoenix Suns as well. And, some of their young players are going through our education sort of as we speak, So anyway, but what, these sports projects are fun, but they really have only represented maybe like 5%, of our business over the years. So it was like the spice in the recipe, the fun spice in the recipe. We'd have sports projects going, and we'd be sort of rooting for teams. And the Edmonton Oilers was another high profile project with the hockey team up there in Edmonton, and so that's always been a part of the Pacific Institute.
I was also interested in sports and interested in performance, and so therefore was always curious and intrigued and fascinated by the work that you had done or Lou had done with different sports clubs, teams, and individuals. I mean, what was the guy from the LA hit the home run?
Kurt Gibson.
And so there's all these wonderful historical stories of and we'll maybe have a segment on sports successes. For me, the idea of sports and having sports projects has always been attractive, not, because, and I like the way you said it, it's sort of the spice, it's sort of the, add some different fun to it. But it's also such a great way of learning, because sports is so transparent in its performance that you can see self-talk, you can see comfort zones, you can see it. So I often, love being an observer to your wonderful work with the U.S. Olympic. I remember I was trying to get to work with the Canadian Olympic team, and you swim team, and you were working with the U.S. swim team. And I was thinking, well, this isn't even fair, because you guys had Phelps and Loughy and all those guys, and here we were, little Canadians were trying to, take a swing at Goliath. And then you had the secret recipe of you. So anyways, it was always fun. Let me pause here and, maybe just give a chance to, for me, a couple things that I would add to the party is that throughout the evolution of the Pacific Institute in the first 30 years now where we're at, or there was also, and we'll talk to these folks in the future, but there was the contributions of from China, and the terrific story of the China TPI China, or the relationship that we had with TPI Japan, and the diversity that brought to us through different contexts that Lou developed, or our Australian partners, who always seem to be one step ahead of where we are. They sort of see things earlier, and they're really a significant performer. Or the heart and spirit of our South African colleagues, and just their dedication to making a difference in tougher situations. And our Latin America or Central America or our Mexican partners, and just the players that I'm so proud to have, international teammates that are consistent to our mission, but really have the heart and the spirit and the intention that we all share. Anything that triggers, just as we're closing up this segment of the history?
Yeah, the way that you just described those international projects and sort of the different cultures, that we've been exposed to. I think for me, one of the common denominators is, and again, it comes back to our brand, and our business, that, our business is Western psychology for the most part. It's cognitive psychology. And it's been amazing to me, the cross-cultural sort of application that it has. I did mention earlier that, when we went to Saudi Arabia, there were some things that we needed to make adjustment in the curriculum, but it was more like cosmetic things that, that we needed to change. We couldn't talk about Lou having a barbecue and roasting a pig, because that was culturally insensitive, just little stuff like that. But the psychology itself, how the mind works, how creativity works, how people can achieve more of their potential. It's amazing to me how cross-cultural, those wisdoms, and those learnings, turned out to be. And so it's, again, it's, aren't we lucky, Greg? I mean, I just feel like I've been so lucky to have, be able to tell this story, and having sort of been through the whole process of it all, I couldn't have, wished for anything better.
Yeah.
And so I feel I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, well, I share the same gratitude and lucky, and just so fortunate to have something that I have to do in my life that really is on purpose and on spirit, and on mission. So, well, let me pause there. We'll catch you next time on the kitchen table. Be well, everybody.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast with the Pacific Institute. If you like what you heard today, click the like button, or perhaps share this podcast with friends and family. For more information on TPI or how to get in contact with us, please visit www.tpikitchentable.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. See you next time at the kitchen table.